For today, we're playing Ghost of Tsushima, and this time with the RTX 2070, and we'll start it off at 1080p at the max settings. Here we go with that. There we go. Alright, here we go. So far in the low 50s and the high 40s even. Wow, even the mid 40s. The low 40s. Oh, this field is killing it. I think on average it will be playable, to be honest, because it is going to be sitting in the 50s and the 60s. But in those heavier scenes, of course, it's going to fall down into the high 30s and the 40s. And during the times where it does fall down into the high 30s, the game does stutter quite a bit as well. So you keep that in mind. Nice. So this could be a bad take, but I played this game for like 10 hours now or something, and I think this game is a bit overhyped. I remember seeing a bunch of comments, like a lot of comments, on Reddit and on any social media pretty much, begging for this game to come to PC, but actually playing it, it feels like an AC game. It feels like AC Origins, but skinned to be in Japan. It does look fantastic. It's one of the best looking games I've ever played, but the actual mainline quests, I mean, they're pretty boring, to be honest. It's the same kind of missions over and over again, at least for the first 10 hours. It's got trailing missions, which are just whack, and it's got missions where you go into an objective, you search the area for clues, and then leave, or you get attacked. I mean, come on. Like, what's happening here? I think it's still really fun, but a bit overhyped. Again, it could be a bad take, I could be wrong, and it could be a fantastic game later on. But, again, the first 10 hours, that's just how it feels. And yeah, so far, guys, again, it's playing, I guess, mostly well, in the high 40s and the 50s. It does stutter occasionally. For the most part, it is already playable as is. For our VRAM, we're sitting at 7.8 gigs. Ooh, spoke too soon. That was a major FPS dip down to like 11 FPS. And the VRAM dropped down to 7.5 now, 7.4. At some point I will go back and test out like the medium settings and see how that looks and how it plays. But it should do much better on this card at least. And I think it's much more appropriate for this card as well. Alright, DLSS guys at the quality preset. And now we're sitting in the 50s and the low 60s. So a decent FPS bump around 10 to 20. And for the graphics, obviously a bit softer than what you get normally at 1080p, but it's definitely usable. And yeah, back here guys, we're down into the 50s, and pretty close into the high 40s there, but there we go, the high 40s. But again, this is not a deal breaker. I think the game is playable as is, and should be in the 60s for the most part. And with frame gen active, we go all the way up into the 100s. This won't be stable, of course, but way above 60 regardless. You fell off. Yeah, the mid to high 80s here. It's not too bad, of course. It's definitely playable. But so far on this card, I've ran into two issues. The game has crashed. And randomly, I will get some massive FPS dips. So you keep that in mind. It isn't, I guess, fully smooth at all times. I think for this card, I would probably pick a mix of medium and high instead of going for the max settings. But it's really up to you. Try it out, see what you like more, and go with that instead. So I changed my mind, and instead of using the medium settings, I'm doing a mix of medium and high instead. And let me show you that right now. There we go with that. No DLSS again. Let's try it out and see how we go. Wow, and already we are in the 70s and the high 60s. Here we had the high 30s and the low 40s. So we gained around 20 FPS or 30 FPS playing at a lower preset. And for the graphics again, looks fantastic. It's definitely usable. And for the VRAM, it's now at 5 gigs instead of being at 7 or almost 8. It is climbing up, so we'll see how far it goes, but it shouldn't be at least maxing it out. Cool, there we go. This is already playable at mostly 60 FPS. I don't think it fell down into the 50s at all. So really, it's the 60s and the 70s on average. Let's pause it here, enable DLSS with no frame gen, and see how we go there. And again with DLSS, at the quality preset, we're now sitting in the 80s and the 90s. And right here, we're sitting in the mid 70s. So around a 10 to 15 FPS increase. And overall a nice little headroom over what we had before. And out here, we go up into the 90s and the mid 90s. And lastly for 1080p, we are playing with frame gen active. And FPS wise, we are sitting in the 130s and the 140s. And I forgot to mention this, but the entire time, I could not feel any extra input lag. So regardless of your preset, this is definitely viable with this card. And right here guys, we're down into the 120s and the 115 FPS range. Lastly, 440p and again at a mix of medium and high settings. Right here guys, we're sitting in the 50s and the 60s. The game looks gorgeous, it is so sharp, I absolutely love it. I think for me personally, a sharper image is much better than, I guess, playing at a higher preset. So if you can play at a higher resolution, ideally go with that. And with the inclusion of DLSS and frame gen, we can get 60 FPS and above quite easily with this card. So yeah, out here in the 50s and the 60s, and back into that field, it falls down into the 40s. I think it's still playable on a controller. On keyboard and mouse, it might feel pretty bad, but overall, I think it's definitely playable, but not ideal. So let's pause it here guys, enable DLSS with no frame gen, and see if 60 FPS is doable at all. I messed it up. And using DLSS, the balance preset, the FPS is now sitting in the 70s and the 80s. So already above 60 FPS and no frame gen needed. There we go. In the field, it might fall below 60, so let's see. Game looks absolutely gorgeous though, guys. Like even with DLSS, this looks fantastic. And going through the field, it's sitting in the low 70s. And the high to mid 60s potentially. So yeah, very much playable, guys. Should be above 60 at all times. And with frame gen, we go all the way up into the 100s again. So around 30 to 40 FPS increase. And the graphics, of course, look identical. Again, a bit softer, but that was the case with DLSS. So, hasn't changed much, but it will look smoother to your eyes. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. That is Ghost of Tsushima with the RTX 2070. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time, next video. See you guys there.